Year-ender, the president takes questions on his 2014 agenda, its successes and its failures. Cuba's future. We look at this week's historic step toward more open relations between the U.S. and its island neighbor. Every life, a gift. We'll preview a weekend remembrance of people who live and die alone on our streets. And lighting the way. St. Peter's Square shines with Christmas brilliance. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Friday, December 19th, 2014. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick with your news now. As 2014 draws to a close, President Obama responds to questions and anticipates dealing with a Republican Congress in 2015. Jason Calvi is at the White House, where he attended the president's end-of-the-year news conference. Jason?
Brian, with so many questions looming, we were packed inside the briefing room today for the president's end-of-the-year press conference. First question, North Korea. Today, the FBI formally accused the country of hacking Sony pictures. The president says he sympathizes with Sony's decision to pull the film, The Interview, but he wishes they would have spoken with him first.
We cannot have a society in which some dictator someplace can start imposing censorship here in the United States. Because if somebody is able to intimidate folks out of releasing a satirical movie, imagine what they start doing when they see a documentary that they don't like.
The president says they're still looking at which action to take against North Korea, but in his words, it will be proportionate. Now, the president also defended his landmark deal with Cuba, which can open up relations after decades.
Suddenly, Cuba is open to the world in ways that it has not been before. It's open to church groups visiting, their fellow believers inside of Cuba in ways they haven't been before. And over time, that chips away at this hermetically sealed society.
President Obama spoke about improving job numbers and says he's hopeful about a tax deal in Congress next year. But it's been a hard year for the president. On the global front, he struggled with ISIS and Russian interference in Ukraine. And at home, he's had to deal with Ebola and a surge of immigrants, kids at the border, and also Democrats losing big in November. Now the president and First Family head to Hawaii for 2.5 weeks of vacation. But when the president returns, he faces a Republican-controlled Congress. Here at the White House, Jason Calvi, EWTN News Nightly.
Some of the other stories our EWTN News Nightly team has been covering in today's world. The Secret Service needs more training, staff, and leadership from the outside. This, according to an independent panel formed to examine the agency that protects the president and his family. The panel, appointed by the Homeland Security Department, released a summary of its review this week. It says the Secret Service needs more training for officers, more funding, and a more secure fence surrounding the White House. The panel made more than 19 recommendations, but most remain classified. This is the second report that's been critical of that agency's operations following a series of recent security breaches. Susan Crabtree is the White House correspondent for the Washington Examiner. She is at the White House tonight. Susan, this report emphasizes the need for new leadership. What sort of leader is needed to run the Secret Service?
Let me first say that this report was definitely not a whitewash. It reflected exactly the complaints that my sources were telling me about the Secret Service and the problems for months. When it comes to a new director, they definitely want someone from the outside. I've been told somebody who, in law enforcement, a former director of the FBI, or some type of big city police department would be ideal.
So the panel calls the Secret Service insular, focused on itself, doesn't work well with other agencies. Do you think that claim is valid?
That's exactly what my sources have been telling me. They complain about a culture of cover-up at the very top level of management, that they play favorites with penalties, and that they definitely need an overhaul and to start imposing accountability on across the board and impose penalties for the same penalties across the board for the same infractions.
Susan,
So
let's turn to some of the
something.
I'm sorry. Let's turn to some of the other things that the president talked about at his news conference. He said the U.S. will respond proportionally to the North Korea cyber attack. What can the administration do?
I think that's a very good question. It's very difficult to say because North Korea is already so isolated from the rest of the world. But, you know, as we've seen with Russia and other rogue nations, that the United States and the Obama administration tend to impose sanctions on these countries. And I imagine that they'll be doing a lot of talking to Japan to try to further isolate North Korea in the months to come. This is something North Korea has been trying. Their economy has been struggling over the last few decades. They've been trying to reach out a little bit more than they have in the past. So this could definitely hurt North Korea where it hurts in their pocketbook.
And quickly, with 2 more years left, with 6 years behind him of almost no cooperation, he says he will work with a Republican Congress. Can he deliver on that promise?
I think he will do so when it's convenient for him. He said, he pointed to some cooperation during the lame duck to getting the omnibus bill passed, but when it comes to things like Obamacare and the immigration executive action, he definitely said he was not ready to budge on that. He doesn't want to see these unraveled in any way, shape, or form.
Susan Crabtree from the Washington Examiner at the White House, thanks for joining us tonight. Well, the parents of the suspect of the 2012 Colorado theater shooting plead for their son to be spared the death penalty. James Holmes is accused of killing 12 people in an attack at a suburban Denver theater. In a published letter, Holmes' parents asked he be confined to a mental institution for the rest of his life. They say he is not a monster, he is a human being gripped by a severe mental illness. His parents say they pray for everyone in Aurora, Colorado, where that shooting took place. Jury selection for the trial is scheduled to begin next month. Olympic gold medalist Michael Phelps pleads guilty to drunk driving charges at a Baltimore courtroom today. Phelps was sentenced to a year in prison, but the sentence was suspended for a 1.5-year probation. He was arrested for driving under the influence in September. His blood alcohol level of 0.14 was nearly twice the legal limit. This is that athlete's second DUI charge in 10 years. Australian police are investigating the killings of 8 children in a Sydney suburb. When police arrived at the gruesome scene today, they found the bodies of children ranging in age from 18 months to 15 years. A wounded woman who police believes is related to those victims is being treated for her injuries. Police are saying very little about the case. They do not believe the suspect is still at large. And Spanish police have given the all clear in Madrid after a car drove into a political party's headquarters. They initially feared that car could explode. Police say a man drove his car into the ruling Conservatives Party main entrance. They say gas cylinders were seen inside the car. The area was closed off as a precaution. The bomb squad eventually gave the all clear. They now say they do not believe this was a terror attack. The driver reportedly may be suffering from financial problems. The Christmas spirit fills the air tonight at the Vatican. The festivities in St. Peter's Square began with a marching band. Crowds gathered, including many little children. Then, the big moment, the lighting of the giant Christmas tree in the square and the unveiling of the nativity scene. Pope Francis said they remind us of the mystery of the Incarnation and the light that Jesus brought into our world. Finding a great spot in front of the Vatican Christmas tree and the nativity scene is our Rome correspondent, Alan Holdren. Alan, we were all a little surprised when President Obama referred to Pope Francis in the deal with Cuba. We now know that Cuba and the United States have been negotiating, but the Vatican has been involved with this. In fact, Pope Francis wrote a letter directly to President Obama. Do you know what it said?
Yes, the Pope wanted to resolve humanitarian questions of common interest, especially the release of prisoners on both sides. Said they wanted to start a new path to begin a new relationship between the U.S. and Cuba. We know that because the Vatican press office released the contents of that letter.
Now, this didn't happen overnight. In fact, hasn't the Vatican been involved trying to bring something about with Cuba for many years now?
Yeah, the church has been involved as a whole. The U.S. Bishops' Conference and also the bishops of Cuba have long called for an end to this trade embargo and for a normalization of relations. John Paul II went to Cuba for the first time in 1998. Benedict XVI went in 2012. They called for peace and reconciliation. What we can say is that Pope Francis really has brought this home, but not without the help of a few collaborators. One of our news partners, the National Catholic Register, reported this week that Cardinal Pietro Parolin, Pope Francis' Secretary of State, really worked behind the scenes also with John Kerry from the U.S. State Department. And there was also the Archbishop of Havana, Cuba, that had a lot to do with this. So a lot going on behind the scenes. Pope Francis really does get the credit for this, though, and it'll be a highlight of his pontificate.
Well, it is interesting how the Holy See has really become involved in diplomatic relations around the world. Do you think that the Vatican will continue to stay involved in the situation with Cuba? I know some of the experts we've talked with say it really matters what happens now, whether or not this will be good for Cubans, especially Cuban Catholics.
Well, you can always count on the church being there before something like this happens, during and then after as well. The church is always there, and that's why so many nations have diplomatic relations with the Holy See. There are more than 180, if you can imagine that. Just yesterday, there were 13 new ambassadors giving their credentials to the Pope, and the Pope told them that this is diplomacy, taking small steps and achieving something so big as this normalization of relations. He said that the church is present and that the church is often working for outcomes like this one. So this is really an important thing to happen, and it shows why papal diplomacy or Vatican diplomacy is so important.
And now more than ever, Alan Holdren, thank you so much for the great insight that you provide us from Rome, and especially the beautiful holiday spirit there tonight. God bless you, and Merry Christmas to you and yours.
Thank you so much, Brian. Merry Christmas to you.
All right, coming up, they live in isolation and often die alone. This weekend, we honor the dignity of the homeless. And we've heard nothing from Cuba's former revolutionary president, Fidel Castro, as plans for closer ties with the U.S. move forward. Let's pray that this Christmas our church may be open to the gift of God, that she may allow herself to be surprised by the Holy Spirit and be a church that gives birth, a mother church. Many times I think that in some places the church is more like an entrepreneur than a mother. From the homily of Pope Francis at Mass today on this Friday, the 19th of December, thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. Catholics and other people of faith offer prayers this weekend for our nation's homeless. They will also honor the dozens of men and women who died alone on our streets this year. Wyatt Goolsby is joining us with more.
Brian, this Sunday marks National Homeless Persons Memorial Day. And yes, it recognizes the homeless who died this year, but it also brings awareness to the plight of those living on the streets.
'Tis grace that taught.
A somber, cold day in Washington as dozens march through the streets calling for respect and recognition for men and women who are often overlooked.
It's really hard for me to, live in D.C. and see folks just walk past it like they don't matter. And they do matter. And they shouldn't be dying on the streets.
Robert Warren has been homeless 3 separate times since 1988. Now he volunteers for the People for Fairness Coalition, who helped organize a vigil and prayer service today. They're paying tribute to the 44 homeless people who died in D.C. this year.
I would hope that our president, our Congress, our city council, and all us people of faith would just come together and really say that we're not going to allow folks to die because of shelter.
The U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops says that decent, safe, and affordable housing is a human right. Elizabeth Falcon, who advocates for more affordable housing, says rising costs and stagnant wages are big challenges across the country, but she is optimistic that with a lot of help, the situation can improve.
If you don't know how to support an individual person, we want to make sure that you realize that there are ways that you can work with other people to make sure that the system is in place to help them.
We heard a lot at today's service about the importance of human life. Every year, groups have highlighted the homeless on or near December 21st because it is the first day of winter and the longest night of the year. Brian.
Cold nights for the homeless. Thank you, Wyatt. Well, as we continue digesting the new relationship between the U.S. and Cuba, one man seems to be missing from the equation, Fidel Castro. We've not heard from him since the world learned about the new diplomatic deal Wednesday. The 88-year-old leader of the Cuban Revolution and former president occasionally returns to the spotlight. His brother Raul assumed the presidency when Fidel fell ill in 2006. Fidel Castro had written newspaper columns expressing his thoughts in recent years, but so far, nothing from Fidel this week. Pope Francis gets a lot of the attention for his role in this deal, but Vatican interaction with Cuba goes back to his two predecessors. St. John Paul II visited the island in 1998, meeting with Fidel Castro. Then Benedict XVI continued engagement with Cuba with his own visit to Cuba just a couple of years ago. Peter Hakim, President Emeritus of the Inter-American Dialogue, is here in our Washington studios. And by Skype from England, we're joined by Jordan Allott, Senior Advisor to In Defense of Christians. Jordan, the Catholic Church helped with this deal, but is it in the position to push for more religious freedom rights for Cubans? Haven't you talked to some of the opposition leaders on the ground there?
Well, I hope that it would be in a better position. However, I've talked to a lot of opposition leaders, as you said, Cubans who have been working on freedom for Cuba, more religious freedom for decades now. And I would say they're skeptical at best that more religious freedom will come. They don't believe that this deal will really trickle down and affect the Cuban people. There's no promises by the Castro regime that they would allow for more political or civil freedoms. And so they've been duped many times. And at this point, they don't trust the Castro government. And I don't know why we should either.
And Peter, there have been more than 50 years of non-engagement. What diplomatic and trade possibilities would now open up with this new arrangement?
Well, first of all, it's not been 50 years without any engagement.
Very little?
The U.S. has been negotiating with the Cubans virtually the entire period. With regard to the Coast Guard and drug trafficking, with regard to immigration issues, there's just been a lot of conversations by president after president. That's who you negotiate with, by the way, your enemies. And right now, that dialogue is going to deepen, it's going to expand. But remember, there is a lot of exchange between the island now. Cuban Americans are sending upwards of $2 billion a year into Cuba every year as remittances to family members, friends.
They'll be able to send more.
They'll be able to send 4 times more than they're sending now, actually. Secondly, the U.S. is the major supplier of agricultural products to Cuba, and Cuba has to import a good share of what it consumes.
How is this deal being viewed by the rest of the West? Is it?
Oh, I mean, I think that there is very little opposition outside of the U.S. Congress and perhaps pockets in the United States, literally speaking.
And the Cuban people as well.
You have 35 countries in the Western Hemisphere, 33 of them, aside from the U.S. and Cuba, have normal relations with Cuba, have been pushing the United States. If there's one thing that unifies this hemisphere, it's opposition to the U.S. embargo on Cuba.
Now, Jordan just pointed out that the Cuban people are not so thrilled about this. Expand on that a little bit.
Well, I think some are hopeful that maybe the embargo will be lifted, but they're not naive to think that the Castro government is going to change and start allowing them to exercise freedoms of expression or somehow vote for their next leader. I mean, at what point are we going to not, stand up in solidarity with the Cuban people? Hopefully, other Western countries will as well, and demand these sort of basic human rights for the Cuban people. I don't hear a discussion about that.
Yeah, we know that Pope Francis worked with the president on this, and we've heard about the phone calls and the meetings and the letter and that sort of thing. But Cuba is still suppressing the church. Why do you think the Pope would encourage this American support for Cuba when there's no guarantee the regime is going to change there?
Well, I'm not really sure, and I know the church is pretty much the only civil society that's allowed to exist in Cuba, and they do have certain rights, but I don't think anybody would define religious freedom as the ability to, I guess, ask the government what they're allowed to do and not to do. For example, oh, we want to build a church or repair a church. Not that they have many funds to do so, but even when they want to, they have to go to the government and say, well, what do we have to do to be allowed to fix a church or to have a mass or to have an outdoor mass or to, I guess, print a pamphlet and distribute it. They go to the government to ask for these things. That is not in anybody's definition of religious freedom.
That is not. All right, and very quickly, you mentioned Congress being opposed. What do you think they'll do to try to block this, or will they?
Well, I think there'll be a group of congressmen for a variety of reasons. Some are passionately opposed to the Castro government. They've been passionately opposed, and they stand against any kind of U.S. opening to Cuba. They will be at the center of it, but a lot of others will do it because they think it's a good campaign issue. They think it's a good political issue. They want to criticize the president.
Yeah, we'll see how it all pans out. Peter Hakim, thanks for joining us here in Washington. And Jordan Allott, we appreciate you joining us from England. Thank you. And up next, a Pakistani journalist makes a personal connection for us with this week's tragic military school massacre. And Pope Francis jokes with the Italian Olympic Committee at a mass marking its 100th anniversary. May the Lord receive the souls of the departed in his peace, console their families, and convert the hearts of the perpetrators whose violence does not cease, even before children. Pope Francis's prayer for the victims of an attack by the Taliban on a school in Pakistan earlier this week. Thank you for joining us this Friday evening. I'm Brian Patrick, and there's strong reaction from the Pakistani government and citizens of Pakistan after the Taliban attack on that school in Peshawar. Pakistanis staged demonstrations in several cities today, condemning the Taliban and acts of terrorism. It is the last of 3 days of national mourning for those many lives lost in the school shooting. Responding to the national outrage, the Pakistani military launched an assault on militants. The government also reinstated the death penalty and immediately hanged 2 convicted militants. Mehr Tarar is a Pakistani journalist joining us by Skype from Lahore, Pakistan. The Pakistani government is clamping down. It's said that it's killed dozens of terrorists. Do you think that there's public pressure from Pakistanis that their government do more? They've been very lenient on terrorists up to now.
Undoubtedly, there's a huge pressure on government as well as the army to ensure that no stone is, each and everything that they can do to tell these militants, to tell these terrorists that enough is enough. That is what the Pakistani public expects from the government now. And I think the government is going to do as much as possible to show that no action will be spared when it comes to the elimination of terrorists.
Yeah, you're a mom, and your son is the same age as some of these students who were killed. How can you relate in a very special way to the parents of these victims?
As a mother, it's unimaginable for me to even think that you send your son or daughter to school, the place which you consider the safest in the world after your home, and then never to see your child return. I think it's the most horrible thing that could happen to anybody in Pakistan, in India, in the U.S., in Australia, and anywhere in the world.
Is there a movement building there among the people after this terrible attack?
The civil society has, and a lot of people from media, a lot of politicians from all parties have gathered outside the Lal Masjid in Islamabad, and they are demanding that the main what's his name, Mullah Abdul Aziz, the guy who controls that mosque, must be arrested right away. This is a huge thing in Pakistan that people don't really ever go against the clergy, but now they are doing it openly.
Yeah, the support and prayers of all of us are with you and other Pakistanis suffering through this tragedy. Mehr Tarar, Pakistani journalist, thank you for making this a real story, bringing it home to us tonight.
Thank you so much.
Pope Francis gives a thumbs up to Rome's bid for the 2024 Olympic Games in the summer. The Holy Father met with members of the Italian Olympic Committee at the Vatican today for a mass marking its 100th anniversary. He praised the benefits of the sport and peaceful message of the Olympic movement, but the 78-year-old Pope joked he wouldn't be around for the 2024 Olympics. Not so sure, he seems to be getting younger. Thanks for joining us. Merry Christmas and Happy New Year to each of you. For all of us at EWTN News Nightly, I'm Brian Patrick. Good night and God bless you.